Right, let's kick off. Kia ora koutou, ko Sylvie Thrush no tāmaki makoto aho. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Performance Management 101 webinar. My name is Sylvie, I'm MyHR's Chief Evangelist, which means that part of my role is to do HR work for MyHR, so I'm a practitioner who works on the tools. And the other part of my role, of course, is to do this kind of work. So a lot of branding, marketing, educational support work for our customers and people who are aware of the brand. And I'm really looking forward to today's session because we have had our highest ever number of webinar people register for this webinar today, up to about 650, I think, before I jumped off checking earlier. So thank you for coming along. I hope it's going to be a useful session. We'll get off into a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, but we should be wrapping up at about 1:40 p.m. with some time for questions, and then we should have you finished and back into your days by 2 o'clock. So I'll just click through the session here. So a little bit about us before we get started. If you haven't heard of MyHR, or if this is your first experience with one of our resources, we were established in 2013 and we make HR easy. So we're a full service outsourced HR department with a software platform that we've built in-house, as well as a team of expert HR people in the background to help make HR easy for you and your managers. We cover all employment matters, so from the more proactive fun stuff like performance reviews and onboarding and remuneration reviews and L&D, through to what I like to think of as the pointier end of HR, so disciplinaries, restructuring, trial and probation period terminations, the whole shebang. We cover all of your HR needs. The way that we do this is, as I mentioned earlier, we combine expert HR support with smart HR software. So the platform is your one-stop shop for HR truth in your business. It's where your employee profiles live. So if you think of it as sort of a digital filing cabinet for policies and employment documents and records. And then at the back end of the system, you have a team of HR experts who are here to bounce ideas off. If you've got a question about public holidays and how trading on Easter Sunday works, give us a call. We can help you out. If there is a difficult person in your business, which is, of course, what today's material is about, that you'd like some help for navigating, we're here to do that work with you as well. And the platform acts as the bridge between yourself and your managers and your organization and us HR people on the back end. It's a hybrid model that we're really proud of, and we've been going for 11 years strong with no signs of slowing down. So we now support over 1,400 Kiwi and Australian employers. As of the 1st of April, we are also live in Canada with 8 beta clients over there based out of Vancouver. So we have offices in Auckland and in Sydney and Christchurch and now Vancouver, which is all super exciting. I never thought I would have colleagues in Canada when I first joined the business 8 years ago. But our track record speaks for itself, and we're really proud of the relationships and the work that we've done to build connections in the communities that we serve. In terms of the businesses that we work with, we have a range of organisations we support. So our smallest client has 1 employee. He's very keen. He likes to cross his T's and dot his I's. All the way through to 750 employees is about our largest, with Resine Paint being the client who has the most employees that we support. And in amongst that, we have businesses from every single industry you can think of. So a combination in food services, hospitality, we've got professional services, utilities and trades, all the way through to kind of mining and some of those more obscure places that we operate in, which means that your HR team that support you have seen a lot of stuff. There isn't a lot that we haven't seen or come across because of the breadth of industry that we support and the scale of organisation that we work with. So if you do have any HR questions, or if there's anything people related that you would like some help with, I'm very confident that our team would be able to provide that support. All of that is delivered through a business model which is really cost effective. So we charge based on headcount. So your fee every month remains the same. It's not usage based, unlike a consultant or a lawyer. You might call us in January once or twice for a couple of issues. Then in April, you might be calling us, twice a week because you've got questions about public holidays. Maybe we write 2 new employment agreements for you because your business is growing. There might be a disciplinary matter that we're helping you with because someone got a bit hammered at your Easter function and we need to deal with that issue. Your fee remains the same. It's based on headcount, it's not based on usage. And because we don't have any lock-in contracts, it means that you are free to leave at any time, and the onus is on us to provide a really good level of service. So now that I've kept my marketing and sales team happy with the chat about us, we can get into today's session. So just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off, and those of you who have attended our webinars before will be pretty familiar with the format. The first thing I'd like you to do is to tell me what it is that you're looking to learn today. This might be a particular question that you have. It might be something more generally that you're interested in exploring. But if you can take a minute and just in the Q&A function, just let me know something that you're keen to learn or to understand more after you leave the session today, that would be helpful. What it does for me is it means that I can tailor my examples to be a bit more relevant, or I can talk for a little bit longer about certain issues if I know that the audience is keen to hear them. So while I jump through the next couple of points, I'd appreciate it if you felt comfortable just letting me know what's brought you along today, if there's anything in particular that you would like to learn. So these sessions really do come alive when we have good audience participation. Me talking at myself for an hour is something that I will always enjoy, but certainly in terms of making it a more dynamic session, I really do welcome questions. What we'll do is I'll run through my material just to make sure I'm keeping to time and I'm covering off all the points I wanted to talk about today. And then at the end of the session, I'll jump into the Q&A and pull up questions that you've submitted or anything that's come through, and then we'll have that Q&A session at the end. But do please be submitting them as we go along. If you'd like to hold them to the end, you're welcome to, but just be aware that I will be answering them all in one go at the end of the session once we've got through all the material today. As usual, a recording will be available after the session. So if you have to duck away to take a phone call, if you can't stay for the whole time for whatever reason, totally fine. The recording will be available for you, which includes the Q&A time. What this means is if you do have a question that I answer in this webinar, it will be recorded. So if you would prefer to ask it anonymously, I should say, do just let me know. Just use the anonymous feature and put it in. If I do get a question through that isn't anonymous, but it has identifying details, I'll do my best to just scrub those and make it more of a generic question so that we're not risking kind of any privacy breaches at all. So what to expect from today's session? The first thing we'll do is talk about what drives performance. We'll talk about what poor performance is and what it isn't, importantly. We'll then move on to talking a bit about misconduct before we move into what it is that we can do about these situations. And we have a range of informal tools and formal tools that we can reach for as business owners and as managers and as HR professionals when we're managing poor performance. And again, plenty of time for questions at the end. So before we kick off, I'm keen to know what you thought you were expecting when you registered for the webinar. So I will jump into the Q&A just to see what is coming up for the audience. So Anonymous says they're keen to understand more about how to keep unmotivated staff motivated. That's a really, really common question that we get asked, Anonymous. So I definitely have some time today speaking to motivation, which might give you some food for thought there. Jenny, kia ora Jenny, thank you for coming along, says that she's keen for better clarity on support available for disciplinary issues, both if you are a MyHR customer and if you're not signed up as a MyHR customer yet. No problem, I'm happy to speak to that later on. That's a good piece to clarify. Someone else talks about motivating disengaged or underperforming employees. Yep, that motivation piece is coming through loud and clear. What it looks like when, so Dean, kia ora Dean, thank you for coming along, is keen to know more about proactive performance management and juggling performance management with challenging personal circumstances. And that's that balance between empathy and results, right? We certainly can't ignore the fact that if one of our team, maybe has gone through a divorce or is dealing with some health challenges, that will affect their performance at work. And certainly walking that line can be a delicate piece to navigate. So that's a good point, Dean. Thank you for raising that. Some pieces here around getting some guidance for advising leaders regarding toxic team members. Yep, toxicity is a word that comes up in the performance management space a lot. Thank you, Nicola, for raising that one. And a piece from Anonymous around managing performance in light of employee rights. How do we do this safely so as not to end up in an employment dispute? Totally the point of the session today, Anonymous. Thank you for putting that together. And we'll certainly be working through the tools that we have available to manage that without running the risk of PGs. Cool. So thank you everyone for your comments. I've had quite a few of you respond, which is maybe a bit unusual for this point in the webinar. So thank you, everyone. Lots of pieces here around informal or low-level performance management before it gets serious, motivation, kind of frequent one-on-ones. So what I will do is, if I haven't been able to speak to you now, or if I can't get to your questions during the session, what I will do is make a note of them and do my best to come back to you afterwards to make sure that you've had a chance to kind of have your questions spoken to. So thank you very much for letting me know what you're keen to talk about. I think this is going to be a really good session with content that is relevant to the concerns that most of you are bringing today. So let's kick off and start moving through then. And the first thing we'll do is talk about why this matters. So when I deal with managers who respectfully tend to be a bit more old school, or managers who are newer and are just really focused on getting shit done and achieving at work, a question I get asked about why do we spend time kind of dealing with performance and dealing with employees is why does this matter? Why do I care? Why can't I just tell them what to do? And if they're not doing it, I can just fire them and let them go. And my answer is that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Now, this is a quote which I've seen in a lot of different circumstances. As far as I can tell, it's a Burkina Faso quote. Burkina Faso is a country in Africa, but there are a lot of different cultures which have proverbs around the importance of getting a team together if you want to go far. So again, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Most of us on this call will be working with humans and will be working with people. And it is inevitable that some of the people that we work with are not going to be delivering at the level that we would like them to for a variety of reasons, as we'll see. But also that it's really important to be able to get a group of people to work together. It's very unusual that you find one person with the expertise to run a business, do the finance, do the marketing, manufacture the product, troubleshoot, do customer service. There's just too much that happens in a business these days for it to all be under the control of the purview of one person. And most of us will need to bring others into our business to do different jobs to grow the business and move things forward. So it matters because we can't really avoid working with people. Most of us, if you figured out how to do it, let me know. Certainly in an HR world, I can't avoid working with people. But what we also know is that hell is other people. So not only do we need people and need humans if we want to achieve our goals for our business or if we want to achieve our goals for our life, but working with people can be stressful and complicated. So we spend time talking about ways to manage performance, one, because it's important for the success of the business, but also because we're operating in a context where both legislatively and from case law, we have some pretty clear, pretty prescriptive requirements from the government and from our judges who make up our case law around how we deal with each other as employees and employers. There are some pretty clear rights and obligations that both parties have to work with each other in good faith, which means that when we are dealing with concerns or performance at work, we have to be quite careful and quite particular about how we do that, because we can't just run off at the mouth and tell someone to piss off into the sunset and we never want to see them again. When we sign up into an employment relationship, there are rights and obligations to manage, which is why we spend time and why HR professionals spend time working and coaching our clients on the appropriate tools to use to manage performance and behavioural concerns at work. So that said, let's get into what does drive performance at work. So this is an oldie but a goodie. Some of you will have seen this before. It's a diagram I've used previously, but we know that performance is a function of ability, motivation, and opportunity. You must have ability, so the skills that you need. You must be motivated to use them, and you must have the opportunity to use your skills and your motivation in order to perform or to succeed at work. So performance is a function of ability, motivation, and opportunity. And we'll speak about each of these factors in a little bit more detail now to make clear what I mean. So what falls into the ability bucket here is anything to do with the skill or the competencies you need to do your job. So this might be your technical abilities. Can you use Excel to do the things that you need it to do? Can you write code? Do you know how to steam milk to make the coffee as a barista? Do you know how to navigate tricky conversations with your leadership team in order to achieve the results that you want? Do you have the interpersonal skills to navigate those difficult relationships? Do you have the emotional kind of intelligence and the intellectual intelligence to get things done? Any of that kind of stuff falls into this ability space. This is also where we can often have the most impact with training. If someone isn't very good at using Excel, we can send them on a training course. If someone isn't very good at making coffee and tends to burn the espresso, we can train them and show them how to do that. So ability is all about the technical skills or tools that you have in order to do the job. Motivation is the next bit, and it's the most difficult to affect. So being super clear, this is the hardest one for us to control or to influence as managers and as business owners. So we know that in order to feel motivated, most humans need to feel connected. They need to feel like there is a group of people who they are connected to and care about. They need to feel autonomous. They have to be able to have some control over how they do their job and how they organize their time and get things done. And they need to feel competent. They need to feel like they do actually have the skills and the confidence to do the work that's been given to them. So if you have someone who feels connected to the tribe or the group of people or the team that they care about, they feel like they have some discretion over how to do their job and they're not being micromanaged, and they feel competent and skilled and confident enough to do the work, those three factors combined for most people are going to be enough to get them motivated and to get them kind of showing up and getting things done. Other things that matter here are some things around how personally driven you are to succeed. Some of us have more ambition to succeed in a work context than not. Whether you have an appetite for career growth, what your own interest in getting and developing yourself is, all of these factors will affect how motivated someone is at work. And motivation matters because you can have the shiniest Ferrari in the garage. It can have all of the bells and whistles that you want. You can have the skills and the competency to do the job. But if you're never taking the Ferrari out of the garage, if you're never motivated to actually apply your skills and competencies, then you're not going to be performing, because the Ferrari is never leaving the garage. It's never getting onto the racetrack. So ability and motivation both matter. You have to have the skills and you have to be motivated to apply the skills to your work in order to be performing. Now, opportunity is the piece that in my coaching work I find is least paid attention to by managers and business owners. And opportunity, we can think of as environment, right? If you have a cactus, it's never going to succeed in a lush, tropical kind of greenhouse. A cactus needs to be in a dry place with not a lot of rainfall. And same with an orchid. An orchid's never going to survive in a desert environment. So your opportunity side of things is the environment in which you are trying to get things done, in which you are trying to perform. And things that make for a better environment or better opportunity for performance are all kind of your management basics. So having clear objectives and outcomes for a particular job or a particular task, making sure that your team have the right tools for the job. Does their laptop work, or is it 5 years old and slow all the time? The tools that they need to be treetop and kind of blunt, or are they sharp and always there ready to go? Is there a supportive environment? Can people ask questions, and do they know where to go to for help? Is the workload manageable? Are there realistic expectations on behalf of the business or management about what someone might get done in a week or a month or a quarter? And is there a sense of psychological safety? Do people feel comfortable making mistakes, asking for help, and raising their hand if they need some support? So you can have the smartest person who is the most motivated to succeed, but if they're in an environment where there aren't clear expectations, it's toxic, there's a lot of talking about people rather than talking to people, they don't have the right tools, kind of people are pretty blamey, it's not really safe to make mistakes or to ask questions. You can see how the smartest, most motivated person is never going to be able to perform in that environment, not because they're not smart or motivated, but because the environment isn't allowing them to succeed and to perform. So when we think about performance, we need to be thinking about ability and skill, motivation and drive, and opportunity and environment. And if you have someone who isn't motivated at work, or isn't performing, one of the first questions or the first points of conversation that I will run with the manager is to say to them, well, do you think this is a skill problem or a motivation problem or an environment problem or a context problem? And if it's a skill problem, well, let's offer them some support or some training. Is there coaching we can offer them? Can they sit alongside someone at work and see how they do things? If it's a motivation problem, what can we do to show them that they have autonomy, to make them feel competent, and to make sure that they feel connected to their team or to the why of their job or the why of their business? Is there stuff that we can tackle here? And again, if it's an opportunity or an environment problem, do we need to set clearer expectations? Are we providing enough support? Are there enough resources for them to get their job done, or are they spending most of their time just trying to navigate roadblocks and not enough time actually doing the doing of their job? So the AMO model is an oldie but a goodie, and what we use it to do is to understand where the issue in performance might come from. Is it a skill problem, a motivation problem, or is it an opportunity and environment problem? So having looked at what drives performance, let's talk about what poor performance actually is. So poor performance is failing to deliver or failing to consistently deliver on the outcomes or on the tasks that you're expected to be responsible for. So some examples include not hitting sales targets, poor or sloppy communication with clients that drives complaints, not getting enough work done, or perhaps not getting enough work done to the appropriate level of quality. For example, if you need someone to be building 10 widgets a day and they're making 5 widgets beautifully made, but they're not getting to the 10 that you need, even though they're making 5 beautiful widgets, if you need them to be doing 10 a day, they are underperforming. Missing deadlines, anything that drives complaints from customers, all that kind of stuff is usually poor performance. And a point here to make is that inconsistent performance is also poor performance. One of the nuanced difficulties that comes up when we're working with businesses around poor performance is often you'll have someone who you like, who is a good human, who you know is trying really hard, and some months they smash it. When they're on and they do an amazing job. But in other months or weeks, they're off their game, shit kind of gets lost, things don't happen, they miss emails, they're not getting things done. And the manager's kind of tearing their hair out because they're going, I know they are capable of performing. The last 2 months have been amazing, but this month is going to have to be a complete write-off because they're totally not hitting sales targets, or they're totally dropping the ball on this big project for a really key customer of ours. So inconsistent performance is poor performance. You don't have to suck 100% of the time to be a poor performer. You just need to be not delivering consistently, and kind of that's enough. Now, again, everyone's allowed an off day or an off week or an off month. We're not saying that everyone has to be at 100% of their game 100% of the time. Everyone's allowed a bit of grace, but certainly if there is a consistent pattern of up and down performance, where some months they're on the money and some months they're off, inconsistent performance is poor performance, and you can certainly start to manage it if you need to. Now, let's talk about misconduct, because misconduct is something that comes up in disciplinary context most often. It's not often thought of as poor performance, but in the conversation about managing difficult people or difficult situations at work, I thought it would be important to touch on this just to give you an example of what you might be dealing with. So misconduct is any behavior that undermines trust and confidence in the employment relationship. So examples of this would be, of course, being repeatedly late to work. That's really frustrating. Certainly being rude to colleagues or customers counts. Kind of ongoing surliness or apathy, or just being a bit of a grumpy bugger, where that kind of affects your relationships again with your colleagues or with your customers. Not following reasonable instructions or company policy comes up a lot. Often we have employees who think they know better, and sometimes they do, but the way that they go about having an instruction or a policy that they don't agree with is to not comply or not to follow those instructions. And if that happens even once, that can be an instance of misconduct, depending on kind of the severity of the issue. And certainly repeatedly failing to follow instructions or company policy can escalate that into a serious misconduct issue. We'll talk about that a bit later. Passive aggression, kind of anything where the employee is just being a bit of a dick, repeatedly missing deadlines and not getting things done when they say they will. Any of this kind of stuff can fall into this misconduct bucket of issues. Poor performance and misconduct are both things that you can start performance management conversations about. They're both things that you can take people through a disciplinary process for, and ultimately you can be fired for these concerns. So it's worth kind of being aware that even if something isn't, let me just click back, even if something isn't a performance issue and it's more about how someone's behaving, we can manage both of those, and you don't have to put up with that in your business or your team. So we spoke about what drives performance at work. I thought we'd spend a bit of time here just talking about what drives misconduct. And it's a range of factors, right? So people act like dicks at work for a combination of reasons, and this will only ever be some of them. So negative emotions are certainly something to be aware of. If someone's feeling worried or angry or frustrated, they're feeling anxious about something, that's going to show up in behaviors in ways that are potentially unhelpful and might be a bit destructive. But likewise, positive emotions can be as much of a driver of inappropriate behavior as negative emotions. So if you have someone who's really excited and super hyped up and just super enthusiastic, that might lead them to go off and pursue a bunch of projects which actually aren't important to the core business, or it might lead them being overly excited and familiar and giving hugs and kisses to everyone at the staff party. They're not doing it because they're grumpy. They're doing it because they're so thrilled to be seeing everyone. But again, hugging and kissing your colleagues is often not okay, and often will breach other people's sense of personal space. So positive and negative emotions can be as much a driver of misconduct as each other. Then we come into substances. Of course, alcohol and drugs will affect our judgment in lots of different ways. Particularly alcohol slowly switches off our ability to access the thinking part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, so we can make decisions which aren't very sensible. And some prescription medications have this effect. So if you're dealing with anything psychoactive, so medications often for mental health conditions or very gnarly painkillers, any of that kind of stuff can affect how we behave and how we show up at work. And so if you do have employees taking medications, you are allowed to ask if there are any consequences or any ways that it might affect how they work, which you need to be aware of. Then peer pressure. There are often social drivers behind people acting inappropriately. It felt like everyone was doing it, and so I just kind of went along. When we're thinking about economic drivers of bad behaviour, when people are under financial stress, that can show up in work in unhelpful ways. And then we get into kind of the health conditions where people will behave in ways that might be unusual or might not be very constructive at work. So if we're thinking about mental health conditions, we're talking about depression, about bipolar, ways that we can show up that unhealthy. If you've got developmental disorders or learning difficulties like ADHD or dyslexia, again, those conditions might drive behaviour and might drive behaviour that's undermines trust and confidence at work because of the way that you're showing up or the way that you're dealing with problems or with colleagues. So having just talked about all of the ways that people can be dicks at work, let's talk about how we can respond and the tools that we have available to manage these situations. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about these informal tools, and then we'll move on to the formal tools later. Now, these are on screen here in order of intensity, I guess. So from least intense to most intense. Certainly you don't have to go 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 when you're dealing with a situation of poor performance or misconduct. Depending on the facts, some approaches might be more sensible than others, but I'll talk you through them first, and then we'll go into the formal tools, and then we'll talk a little bit more about disciplinaries before getting into questions, and we should be good for time. So when you have a performance issue or a behavioural issue, sometimes the best thing to do in that situation is to do nothing. Now, the term masterly inactivity actually comes from, of all places, German military theory in the 18th century. Don't ever tell me HR doesn't draw on a wide range of sources for our terminology and our approach, but it basically means that you're not leaping to action right now. You're staying aware of the situation, you're monitoring it, and you might step in if something doesn't improve. So one example might be, so we had a leadership meeting a few weeks ago at MyHR, and I have a colleague, well, I have many, but this particular colleague I get along with really well. We're friends outside of work. We'll catch up for a drink every few weeks and just chat about how life's going. So we have a really strong relationship. And in the meeting, she was talking about a project that's been causing her a lot of grief. I know she's been really frustrated about it. And in the meeting, when I was asking questions or trying to engage, she repeatedly talked over me and kind of was quite abrupt and wasn't really letting me ask the questions or give her the feedback that I thought might be helpful to moving things along. Now that was frustrating for me as a colleague in a meeting. I'm just trying to, provide her some guidance or respond to the problems that she was tabling for our management team to solve. But I know she's been stressed about the project. I know that we have a good relationship otherwise. So it's not that she hates me and doesn't want to work together. It's just that there might have been a bit going on. So I'm actually not going to talk to her about it or call her out on her behavior at the meeting. I'm just going to keep an eye on it. And if it happens again, maybe I'll need to do something about it. But I'm being masterly inactive in that I'm noting that it happened, but I have enough context to know it's probably not an issue. She didn't call me she didn't swear at me or anything. She just was a bit abrupt and a bit short in the meeting. So I'm going to do nothing, keep an eye on it. If it keeps happening, maybe I'll talk to her about it. But I'm not going to add fuel to the fire and blow up at her and tell her she's a terrible colleague and that I want to take her for a recorded discussion, because that would be way out of proportion to the situation. Now, if you have someone in your team who is starting to kind of scratch that tingle of you think there might be a problem here, but you're not sure what it is, you might need to get some more information to make sure you understand the situation. And this might be asking someone what's happening in their life. If you have a star performer who suddenly had an off few weeks, you might just want to take them for a coffee and say, hey, I'm a bit concerned about you. It doesn't feel like you're as bubbly as you are at work. It feels like you're quite flat and quite down. Are you okay? Is there anything that I need to be aware of or any support that you need from work? Likewise, Likewise, if there is a brewing tension between two of your team members, you might not want to jump in with both feet first and crack heads together and get them to move on. You might just want to ask them a couple of questions, keep an eye on their relationship, check in with them both to see if there's any support that you can provide. You're just getting some information to make sure that you know what's going on. You're not doing anything yet. Next, you might choose to give feedback. So giving feedback should be just part of the day-to-day of working together with other humans. It's particularly common with new starters or people who are new to your business, or with younger employees, often just saying to someone, hey, the way that you titled that email I didn't think was super appropriate. There are largest clients who are opening up with with 2 exclamation marks maybe isn't the tone that we're going for. Next time, I prefer if you said hello or good morning or even hi, that's fine. But I'm just giving you some feedback that the tone of that email wasn't super appropriate. So you just might want to help someone course correct. And feedback can be from colleagues to each other. It might be from yourself to a direct report. It might be from you to your manager sometimes. That can be a bit scary. But just giving feedback is an informal tool that we have to manage concerns about behaviour or performance. It's not gnarly. It's just a part of the ebb and flow of working together and figuring out how we can all kind of be the best at our jobs. Now, an informal discussion is where we start to get a bit more serious and when talking about the issue. So an informal discussion might look like me saying to my colleague, hey, can I grab you for 10 minutes later on today? There's something I just want to run past you. And then we might go into a private room and say, hey, so-and-so, the way that you engaged with me when we were talking about project XYZ at that management meeting made me a bit uncomfortable. I was trying to ask questions. I could see an opportunity for doing something differently with the client that you're working with, but the way that you reacted was that you talked over me, didn't let me finish my questions, and overall it left me feeling like I didn't have the best opportunity to give you the feedback or guidance I thought you were asking for. What was your experience of that conversation? Kind of, can you tell me what was going on for you and if we need to do something differently to collaborate together next time? So no one's in trouble. It's not just kind of casually giving feedback. I am saying, here is an issue I was unhappy with. Here was my experience of the problem. What was your experience and what do we need to do next? And sometimes we might need to agree on next steps. So she might say, what might she have said? I found receiving feedback on the fly a bit uncomfortable. What I'd prefer to do next time is if you see something that you'd like to tell me about the project I'm working on, is if you can grab me afterwards and talk about it. But because I was trying to tell the story of the project on the go, people jumping in with the feedback made me feel a bit kind of frazzled, and so I didn't react as professionally as I could have done. Totally cool. No one's in trouble. There's no disciplinary, but we've identified that there's a way that she likes to be engaged with that is not how I was engaging with her, and I can totally do that differently next time. So again, all of these are informal. You can do nothing and just see how something develops. You're just keeping an eye on it. You might need to get more information to understand what's happening so you can decide how to proceed. You might just choose to give some feedback to someone and let them know that their way that they're performing or behaving isn't quite on the money. And you might just want to have an informal chat with someone to quietly and privately address the issue before it escalates and becomes more serious. So now we jump into our formal tools. So the key difference between informal and formal tools is mostly one of tone, and it's mostly about documentation. So none of these informal tools has anything been written down, right? There's no letter, there's no email, there's no notes on anyone's file. It's just kind of the ebb and flow of working together and making sure that we're all working effectively. Now, these formal tools are now documented. There are copies of documents that go to the employee as well as that are kept on their file. There are agreed next steps and outcomes. There is agreed support offered by the business or by the employer. So this is where we start to get more formal because we're talking about documentation, things being written down, kind of clearly articulated plans. And the first of these formal tools is what's called a formal discussion, sometimes a record of discussion. So it's basically a process where you say, I am now formally raising that I have concerns about your delivery. I want to know what your side of the story is, and I want us to agree on a plan forward for addressing this performance issue. Or it might be, I've got formal concerns about your behavior. You're repeatedly late. This means that your colleagues are having to cover the customer service hotline more frequently than you are. It's causing frustrations. Kind of what do we need to do to change things? So your role is to raise the issue, again, understand what the employee side of the story is, agree on next steps, and then there's support or training or coaching involved. Now, a record of discussion is mostly is enough to resolve the issue. If you've had someone who hasn't been picking up on the cues you've been giving them with these informal tools, perhaps, and they need, just a bit more clarity or a bit more explicitness in how you're talking to them about the issue, a record of discussion can be a really good place to go, okay, this is serious enough that we're having a proper conversation about it. You're not in trouble. I'm not punishing you, but I do need to make clear my expectations. What do you need to tell me about what's been going on, and what do we need to do to move things forward? I do have a copy of an R&D to show you in a second, and so I'll pop that up once we're done with this section. Now, a performance improvement plan is almost always called a performance improvement plan, even when it deals with behaviour or performance. So you can call it a behaviour improvement plan, but that sounds a bit like something you're managing an 8-year-old with. So we tend to sit with PIP or performance improvement plan. And at this point, it's formal performance management with the clearly communicated potential outcome that their employment may end if these issues aren't resolved. So what we're saying is, here are these objectives we expect you to achieve. Here is the support you will be given to achieve them. Here is the time frame you have to make these improvements or to close this gap. And if you don't close this gap, we may take disciplinary action to put you onto a formal written warning for underperformance, and then we'll start another PIP with you. So the PIP is the first point in time where we say these issues are of serious enough concern that your employment may be at risk, and that's written and documented in the PIP to make it really clear. And it's the first time we're kind of setting timelines and clear objectives and clear requirements for improvement. And again, I have a PIP document I can show you as we move through. Now, the disciplinary process we'll talk extensively about in the next couple of minutes, so I won't spend too much time on it here. But a disciplinary process is what you must go through in order to get someone either to a formal written warning or a final written warning, or to dismissal, either with notice or without notice, depending on the severity of the issue. So even if you've done all of these other things perfectly to get here, that's fantastic. You have clearly documented that you have been communicating your expectations to your employee and that you've been holding them to account for whatever the issue is. As soon as you want to get to a point where there is a punitive outcome, so a warning or dismissal, you need to be consulting with your employee and giving them the chance to provide feedback and seek representation in particular on that issue. So, having just bombed all of that at you, let's now look at some of the legalese you need to be aware of when using these tools. So what you need to be aware of is that whenever you are doing anything formal with your employees, there are two equally important things to be aware of. The first is that you must have substantive justification for whatever it is that you're doing. Basically, that your employee needs to have fucked up and you need to be doing something that is proportionate in response to that. So if someone is late once and you jump to termination, no notice for serious misconduct, you don't have the substantive justification for that outcome, right? You are being much too severe for one instance of lateness. So whatever the issue is, the employee needs to have done something wrong that they knew was wrong, and then you need to be responding appropriately. That's what substantive justification means. The second thing is that there needs to be procedural fairness. And this means that how you go about managing the fuck up or managing the issue is as important as whether there was an issue in the first place. So even if we had 10 police officers filming someone stealing jewelry from a jewelry store, that person still has the right to go through a criminal trial with witnesses being brought and with a defense lawyer, and then to be kind of sentenced by a judge or by a jury of their peers, even though it was very, very obvious that the bad thing, the substantive justification, happened. Plenty of witnesses, black and white, clear as day, no challenges about whether it happened, but the process matters as much as the issue which triggered this whole piece in the first place. It's the thing that most often trips up personal grievance claims. So there was some research done, I think in 2021 or maybe 2022, which looked at PGs that made their way through to the Employment Relations Authority. And in PGs where they were decided in favour of the employee, about 70% of them were because the employer didn't follow the correct process. The employee had totally been a dick, or the employee had totally been in the wrong, but what tripped up the personal grievance claim was not the substantive justification piece. It was that the employer didn't follow a fair process when dealing with the issue or with the concern. So equally important to bear in mind, and it's where HR people tend to spend most of our time, making sure that we're coaching our managers and our leaders on following fair process to avoid that legal risk. So whenever you're doing anything formal, whether that's a record of discussion, a performance improvement plan, or a disciplinary process, there are some guiding principles here to be aware of. So the first is to make sure that you're giving the employee all the information that you have. Don't hold anything back. Be communicating proactively and promptly with them about it. If there is an email you received from a customer with a complaint, you need to be able to share that email with the employee to say, here's what it is that we're dealing with. Holding things back and trying to trap them into saying something is not okay. We need to be able to present all the information that we're using to inform our concerns about their behaviour or their performance to the employee. Treat your discussions and processes confidentially. Again, this should go without saying, but if you're having conversations with an employee about behavioural performance, you can't be talking about that to other employees or anyone else in the business who doesn't have the appropriate access to know about it. As always, give your employee the chance to provide feedback. If they do provide feedback, you are legally obligated to fairly consider it. You don't have to agree. Consultation does not mean agreeing with your employee. It just means listening to what they have to say and considering it. And if you don't agree that their feedback justifies why they were stealing from the till, and if you don't agree that their feedback explains why they were being really snarky to a particular customer, that's fine. You can disagree. You just need to show that you've listened to what they have to say and have taken it into account. Again, provide employees the option to seek advice and bring a support person if they want to. This becomes particularly important at the disciplinary level, but even when we're talking about a record of discussion or a performance improvement plan, if an employee says, I would like to have a support person here, like my partner or a friend or my parent or a cousin or whatever, most of the time you should give them the opportunity to bring a support person along. And lastly, at all times, you must act in good faith and as a fair and reasonable employer could in the circumstances. Our good faith obligations are written into law. It's not something we can opt in or opt out of. And at all times, we have to behave fairly and reasonably, regardless of whether we're sick to death of this person and are just tearing our hair out trying to deal with them. The onus is on us to behave fairly and reasonably and to make sure that we're not letting our tempers get the best of us or letting our emotions get the best of us. So quickly blasting through what these documents and tools look like. This is an example of a record of discussion. You can use any format that kind of is appropriate for your business. This is the one we use with our clients. And they consist of talking about what the issues are, so what's going on here, hearing the employees' feedback and response, and then any agreed outcome and follow-up down the bottom. You'll see that there's space for the employee to sign the document and for the managers to sign it too. A copy goes to the employee for their records and a copy goes to their file. So you're starting to see that the feeling of formality is coming in here, right? Because it's written down, we've both signed it. There's a change in tone from just giving someone the feedback of, hey, I'm a bit frustrated with how late you are to work. Can you please make an effort to be on time going forward? Next, we have a performance improvement plan. Again, you can use any format that's appropriate. This is the one that we use with our customers, but you can see that this is now a bit more explicit in terms of what we're asking for from our employee. So we've got a section here around objectives and targets. There's going to be manager comments when we come to assess the target. We've got a date by which we want it to be achieved. There's a yes, no, and then there's a little note to say who the person was who assessed this and the date on which the assessment took place. So for both the ROD and the performance improvement plan, it's really, really critical that you do actually follow up on any support that you commit to providing. If you're having a conversation with an employee about poor performance, maybe they haven't hit their sales target 2 months in a row, and you say that one of the things that you will do is put them with a senior person for some coaching to give them some support on how to close deals better. If you don't do that and the employee then doesn't achieve the following month, you can't fairly discipline them or tell them off because you said you would give them support and you haven't given it to them. You've not met your obligations, and so it's not fair to expect the employee to have miraculously improved when you haven't provided them with support. So make sure you follow through, make sure you do what you say. Again, not surprising, but easy to get lost in the busyness of kind of running a business and being in the mix of things. So I've been promising that we'll talk about disciplinaries, and here we are at last. So a disciplinary process is a formal consultation process with an employee. Again, consultation and agreeing are not the same thing. Consultation just means that you're proposing something, listening to feedback, and then making a decision, taking that feedback into account. So a disciplinary may result in a formal or final written warning, or dismissal with or without notice. There's no such thing as instant dismissal in New Zealand. In every single case, you must go through a process. What may happen is that once you've been through the process, if the employee has engaged in serious misconduct, so theft, assault, violence, fraud, any of the kind of the big things that we think of as serious misconduct, if it's written into your employment agreement that you may be able to terminate without notice under those circumstances, it means they don't get paid their notice period, but you've still been through a consultation process, which may have taken anything from 4 days to kind of 2 or 3 weeks. So no such thing as instant dismissal in New Zealand. You'll get in a lot of trouble if you do it. So if you do have someone that you think is or has engaged in serious misconduct, I would strongly recommend that you seek some professional advice so that you know how to manage the situation. And a disciplinary can be used for poor performance, misconduct, or serious misconduct. Now, if you're stacking warnings to get to termination, the first warning might have been for poor performance, so failing to meet sales targets. The final written warning might be for shouting at a customer on the phone and losing your temper. And then your third and final disciplinary process might be for repeated lateness and repeatedly missing deadlines. So they don't have to be for the same issue to get to dismissal for poor performance. You just have to have the formal written warning in place, then the final written warning in place, and then your third disciplinary is the one where you're looking at dismissal. In all of those cases, a consultation process is required, and unsurprisingly, your employee has certain fixed rights. So they have a right to representation. This could be a lawyer or an advocate. They do have the right to know everything that might be important in your decision to give them a warning or dismiss them. So if you have emails that are informing this, we need to share them. If you've got financial kind of records, you need to be able to provide that to them. If you as a manager have been taking notes on all the times that they've been late, you need to be able to share a copy of those notes. Because the employee needs to know what's in the case against them in order to be able to fairly give you feedback or their comments on what the case is against them. They also have the right of reply. So if an employee is being taken through a disciplinary process, the person who's making the decision about whether or not to give them a warning or dismiss them needs to be involved in the process in some way so that the employee can respond to them. It's not fair for the employee to always be arguing their case to I guess intermediaries or middle management people. The person who's responsible for making the ultimate decision needs to be able to hear the employee feedback, and the employee has a right to speak to that person. They can also ask for more information if needed. If the employer maybe hasn't presented a full case to them and there are gaps, the employee can ask for information. You need to give that to them. And they also have a right to a reasonable amount of time to seek advice and prepare a response. Now, a reasonable amount of time is quite stretchy. So anything up to 2 weeks is considered pretty typical. We tend to go with 2 or 3 working days as a starting point, but probably in a third to a half of the disciplinaries we do, we will need to extend that, particularly if it's a quite a long disciplinary with quite complex matters. So yeah, 2 to 3 business days is a minimum. Up to 2 weeks is reasonable, again, depending on how detailed the case is against the employee and how much time they might need to seek through. Now, one of the questions earlier here was what support does MyHR provide to our client for this? So we will actually write your disciplinary documents for you. So the way it works is you would log into your MyHR account and start a disciplinary process. You're asked to submit a form which has information about what the issues are, when they occurred, like what the dates were, if there are any witnesses, any of that kind of stuff, when you want to meet with this employee, and a bit more about managing the process. That then gets assigned to one of our HR advisors or our HR business partners, who will then look through the information that you have and just check it all lines up. They might give you a call or drop you a message to say, hey, you mentioned here that there was an email from a customer frustrated about the quality of the delivery that they received. Can you please forward me a copy of that email? We will need to supply it to the employee in the disciplinary. And they're there to not only help you implement the process by writing documents for you, but also they're there to help sense check the decisions that you're making. So if you're telling us that you want to fire someone for an instance of being late once, we will say, that's going to be illegal. There will be significant risk that if the employee chooses to raise a PG, they will win the PG. So you might be on the hook for kind of 10 to 30 grand for this. Is this person such a pain in the ass that you're willing to take the risk to terminate them now? If you are, that's fine. We'll write you the documents and get you there. But our job is to let you know what to expect so that you can make an informed decision about how you manage your business. So we'll write the documents for you. We'll sense check the case that you're building. We'll make sure you've got all the proofing documents you need to supply. And we'll give you guidance and options about your choice for managing the employee. So that's a service that's available to all MyHR clients. It's a part of your monthly fee. Again, we don't charge extra for the work that we do. It's based on how many people, your fee is based on how many people are in your business. So that's an example of where we add a lot of value to the work our clients do by running these processes for them. To give you a sense of scale, we do between sort of 35 and 40 disciplinaries a week at the moment. So what's that, like 8 a day sort of come in from our clients. And again, that's everything from poor performance, being late, just being a bit rubbish, through to pretty serious misconduct cases of violence, sometimes family violence if they work together, sexual harassment, fraud, all that kind of stuff. So if you're a MyHR client and you have someone who's causing you trouble, even just give us a call to let us know what the situation is. We can give you some options for how you might want to move forward. And again, we'll write your disciplinary document for you. We'll give you a script to read out in the meeting so that you're not saying anything troublesome, and make sure that you're staying well within the bounds of what the law requires. So that brings us to the end of the presentation content I had lined up for us. We now have 10 minutes for questions, or 11 minutes. I've gone a little bit over time. So is there anything that you would like to know, or anything in particular that I haven't spoken to here that you would like to discuss now? And I will just jump in and check to see if anything has come through while I was talking. So bear with me. So Anonymous asks, if other employees are informants in a conduct issue, would their names and comments have to be given in the disciplinary situation? That's an excellent question, Anonymous. Most of the time, the answer is yes. So an employee has a right to know who is saying what about them if what is being said might result in them being given a disciplinary. And the reason for that is oftentimes there are factors in the relationship the employee has with these people, which are important for the employer to know when making a decision. So we had one case, this is years ago, but I always use it as an example, where a male employee lodged a very serious complaint against a female employee. He accused her of bullying, of harassment, of just basically being a really nasty piece of work at work. And when the employer got quite alarmed, obviously, and rushed to talk to the female employee to say what was going on, and we've had this complaint. And the female employee said, "Oh, I'm really sorry that that's happened. The context is that so-and-so and I were a couple for 4 or 5 months. So we've been in a relationship. I've ended the relationship and I'm seeing someone else. And I've been receiving a lot of like kind of jealous, alarming texts and messages from this person. So you're welcome to investigate his claims of me being a dickhead, but you need to be aware that he's the jilted party because I've broken up with him and like he's feeling pretty sour about that." So ultimately, that ended up with the employee who laid the complaint being dismissed because they were lying. They weren't telling the truth. But you can see why it's important for employees to know who is saying what about them because of the nature of the issue. Where you are going out and or even if information is given to you directly, or if you're running an investigation and you've gone out to ask for information from your employees, you do need to make them aware and get their permission to share that information before you do. But yes, you will need to, as best you can, supply all of the information you've received, regardless of who it's come from, with names attached to an employee if that forms part of a concern. Anonymous asks, if we are a MyHR customer and we request a disciplinary, what is the turnaround or time frame before we have a letter to present? Yeah, good question. So we work on a 2 business day turnaround time for 99% of the requests that we receive. So if you put a request in for a disciplinary at 10 a.m. on Monday, you will have all of the documents you need for meeting 1 and meeting 2 by 10 a.m. on Wednesday. If it's a serious misconduct issue, like one of your employees has assaulted someone, or there's been violence at work, that gets flagged to us and the team will pick it up quicker. So you'll get a quicker response from us so that you can manage the situation urgently. But 2 working days is the turnaround time for us to get those documents back to you. We've got a question here. After going through a PIP with no improvement that results in a first warning, how do you then move to a second written warning if it's continued poor performance? Yeah, good question. So you've done a PIP, there's been no improvement. You then run a disciplinary for failing the PIP. So failed PIP, disciplinary formal written warning, you immediately, as you conclude the disciplinary, kick off the next PIP, and maybe you shorten the time frame on that. So if your first PIP was for 2 months and they didn't make the improvement, you immediately run a disciplinary for failing the PIP. And when you conclude that with a warning, the warning and the PIP go together. So now it's for a month. You run them through the PIP a second time. Assuming they fail that, you immediately kick off a second disciplinary to go to a final written warning. And once you issue the final written warning, the PIP kind of goes with that. So if you imagine them hooking onto each other and following one process on from another, you need to have the PIP in place the whole way as you go through. Cool. Anonymous asks, are we allowed to use video evidence from cameras mounted in the workplace to bolster the case for misconduct? The cameras are visible and the employees have been made aware that they are recording. Yes, absolutely. So you can't use hidden cameras. If you have security or CCTV footage in the workplace, your employees need to be aware of it and need to have agreed to it. Often this isn't a handbook. We recommend it's in employment agreements if you do have security footage. But assuming that's all fine, if you have footage of something bad happening, you can 1000% use that as information to support a disciplinary case. That's totally fine. So make sure employees are aware of it, make sure it's documented in your policies and your processes. And then if you have footage of someone stealing from the till or footage of someone shoving an employee, totally use that to inform your disciplinary case. It's absolutely fine. Cool. Anonymous says, I'm managing a conduct issue. There's negative chatter from a team member which is affecting the team culture and making other team members uncomfortable. Most of our information is hearsay and he said, she said. We do have one incident which has been witnessed and action taken, but we're aware of negative chatter and rabble-rousing happening when management are not around, potentially an informal discussion. Are there risks in this approach to watch out for, and would we follow up in writing? That's a really tricky one, Anonymous. I'm sorry that you're dealing with that. And it's really pernicious. Like it can really damage the morale of the team and really get in everyone's heads when you've got kind of constant chatter going on. So I would do a couple of things. I think I would have a record of discussion. So I would escalate the formality. And I think I would use the he said, she said examples and anything that your team or your management team have observed to inform the conversation. And the way that I would run it would be to say, well, let's call him Thomas. You would say, hey, Thomas, we've been made aware that there is a consistent tone to your communications to your colleagues and in the environment that is quite negative. Some of the examples that we've been made aware of include this and this and this, and myself or my management colleagues have witnessed this kind of behavior. That's not really how we expect our team to talk about each other or to talk about the work or to talk about our customers. It's affecting the vibe, and we're kind of getting feedback that it's affecting how people feel about working here. What's been going on for you? Like, do you think that's fair feedback? Is there anything that you'd like to tell us? What's your side of the story? And then you hear what they have to say, and it might be, they will have a whinge, they will get defensive. That's fine. You just expect that. And then you can say, totally cool. I hear what you're saying. Well, look, this conversation is just to draw your attention to the fact that we've been receiving this kind of feedback. We know that you care a lot about your work here. We know that you are committed to the business, and maybe you kind of weren't aware of the way that your tone was coming across, or maybe this is new feedback for you. What we want to make clear is that our expectations are that if you have frustrations about your colleagues or about your manager or about whoever, that you come and speak to one of us and we can deal with it appropriately. So my expectation is that we don't end up having this kind of conversation again with you about the way that you're communicating at work. And then you kind of just wrap it. So what you've done is go, here's everything that's sort of been going on. I'm pointing out to you, Thomas, that it's happening, but I'm parking it and drawing a line under the sand and making clear what my expectations are. The next time so you've got a record of discussion in place. The next time someone comes to you with that kind of information or feedback, you can then escalate that to potentially a PIP or even a disciplinary, depending on what it is that's happening. Because at the point where Thomas continues to whinge and bitch and be a negative Nancy, he's actually disobeying direct instructions from the management team about the way that he's expected to communicate at work. So you might be able to manage that as a disciplinary. But start off with a record of discussion, draw his attention to it, provide examples, hear him out, let him know that you don't expect it to be happening again. And if there has to be another conversation, you're going to get pretty frustrated. Anonymous asks, we've talked about repeated lateness as an example of misconduct. Could repeated absences also be one? And also, do you need to PIP certain issues before a disciplinary process is triggered? So repeated absences can sometimes be grounds for a PIP or disciplinary. It depends what the reasons are for them. So if someone is repeatedly absent and they're saying it's because of sickness, right? So they're saying, I'm sick, I can't come in today, I'm still feeling crook, I'm not well. If they're talking about it as sickness, you can't punish someone for being sick. So you can't use these tools to manage absences. Even if you don't believe them, that's fine. But if someone is saying they're sick, you can't manage it that way. What you can do is start a consultation process to either reduce their hours or end their employment for medical incapacity. That's quite a large different topic, so I won't go into too much detail here today, but be aware that you can manage people who are repeatedly absent for sickness reasons, but it's not a disciplinary process, it's kind of a medical incapacity route. We do have some resources on the website, or if you wanted to call up and have a chat, we can help you navigate that one. So yes, you can manage them, just be aware that disciplinary is probably not the right pathway to go down. Jay asks, hi Jay, thank you for joining us today. One employee recently has been making too many mistakes. It has been raised with them, but the mistakes continue. When going through a PIP, how would you measure makes less mistakes? It would be too time consuming to review each of their tasks. Yeah, great question. So one of the ways that you can measure a volume of tasks is just to pick a select few. So as an example, in the MyHR world, our admin team have tickets, right? And each ticket is an employment agreement, or it's a question from a client, or it's a letter to be written. So one of the PIP objectives we might set for an admin is to say 95% of tickets are returned to the client with no errors. We'll allow kind of 5% because we know that, things happen and sometimes our clients aren't always super clear about what they're asking for, but 95% should be error-free. And then when it comes time to assess that PIP, what we'll do is we'll say, we're going to look at 10% of your workload. So we can't possibly review every single document you prepare. Again, like you, it would just take too long. But we're going to look at a sample of your work or of your documents. And based on how that sample goes, we're going to take that as representative of your error rate overall. So if we look at how many tickets might they do in a week? So if they did, let's say 150 tickets in a week, and we look at 25 tickets, so that's 1 in every 6 documents. If of those 25 tickets, only 1 has an error, that's awesome. That means that the error rate for that sample was, the accuracy rate was 96%, and so we're happy. If of those 25 documents, 4 had errors, that's now an error rate of 16%, so the accuracy is at 84%, so that's not going to be acceptable for us. So make less mistakes has to translate into complete XYZ% of this particular task with accuracy, again, depending on your circumstance. And when you are assessing it, you can just look at a sample of work. You don't have to look at all of them, but make sure that that's clear in the PIP and that you're explaining how you'll go about assessing whether this person has passed or not. Jumping down, we're just going over time now, so I'll answer 2 more questions, and then again, I'll do my best to come back to those of you who I haven't been able to get to here. If we have, so Anonymous asks, if we have quite a narcissistic, high conflict personality member of staff who is part of the management team that has a continuous target of blame in the workplace, this is one person that they constantly antagonize, wind up, and want their attention, and the target of blame has brought to management's attention that they feel targeted, drained, and that boundaries have been crossed, how's best to deal with this? Anonymous, that's a really difficult situation to manage. Your management team need to step in and either exit that person from the workplace or reduce the amount of contact that this person has with the target, the person that they're targeting, or you need to support the targeted person to kind of work in a way that limits their contact with the damaging person. Sometimes you do just have bad actors at work, if they're narcissists, if they're psychopaths or sociopaths, if they're just someone who's hell-bent on bringing death and destruction whenever they go. It's really hard to coach or structure or performance manage your way out of that. There is something about that person, the way that they operate in the world, which is really hard to improve or resolve. So you either need to remove them, manage them, or limit damage by kind of pulling people out of their sphere of influence. I would suspect that your management team might need to have some courageous discussions amongst themselves about whether they want to tolerate this person in the business. And maybe they do, maybe they have technical expertise, which is so hard to find that it would be really hard to replace them. Maybe they bring in a whole lot of money and it would be really difficult to replace kind of their earnings if you were to let them go. So maybe there are reasons you want to keep them around, but you really, really quickly need to figure out a way to break this damaging relationship and to put pretty solid reinforced steel boundaries around that person, because it is a PG brewing. It may be a health and safety claim brewing. Remembering too that if an employee claims that their health and safety obligations have been not met by the employer, ultimately that can lead to jail time for the directors, whereas through the employment claims path, it's only ever financial penalties. I say that a bit lightly, and I mean, financial penalties are pretty significant, but if the health and safety piece gets into play, you're looking at potential jail time for your directors who were aware and did nothing. That sounds like something you might need some professional support for. So I would encourage you to talk to your employment lawyer or us if you work with us. If not, you're welcome to have a conversation with our sales team. But you need to do something about it, because letting it sit and simmer is not okay. And the employee who's the target of this behaviour has more than done their job by speaking up and letting the management team know that it's happening. It's now on the management team to do something meaningful about it to reduce harm to this person and to their colleagues. So that's a reasonably heavy issue. Anonymous asks, when I'm trying to performance manage someone who has personal issues to do with their health, I do still want to look out for their well-being, but at the end of the day, I need them performing their role and delivering what we need. And if not, then they need to be processed out. Yep, that's a totally fair position to hold. All of us, I mean, no one that I have ever worked with wakes up in the morning going, how can I fire employees who are unhealthy at work today? None of us ever start from that position. But ultimately, if they aren't well enough to do their job, the time might come where you need to part ways. So if there are clear and distinct health problems, again, that termination for medical incapacity pathway might be useful. Please drop me an email if you'd like to know more about that. I'm Sylvie, SYLVIE at myhr.works, or give us a call 0800 694769 and we can have a chat. If the person refuses to agree that it's a health issue and kind of stalls you on the side of things, you can go down the performance management route, because ultimately they're not performing. But that's kind of pretty undignified and not a very kind way to manage things. So the good news is you have two pathways available to you where exit might be the option. You just might need to be a bit judicious about choosing which one is more appropriate and getting some guidance as you go through. Cool. Danny, hi Danny, thanks for joining us, asks, what would be the best way to manage a PIP for an employee who shows no interest or initiative? He does his job, but if he's not physically told to do something, he won't do anything. I think that's a good question. I think I would challenge whether that's necessary. So in some roles, you do need to be able to show initiative, and you do need to be able to pick things up on your own and find work to keep you busy. However, in some jobs, it's okay that people only ever do what they're told to, because their work is so transactional or so mechanistic or so repeatable and reliable. So if it actually doesn't matter that this person doesn't show initiative, I would maybe consider leaving it. However, if they are in a job where it is important they show initiative and kind of do things, you can discipline for that. That's a performance issue. So the way that I would manage a PIP for that would be to say, examples of taking the initiative look like going and talking to the site supervisor and asking for work when you aren't busy, asking your colleagues if there is anything that you can do to help them before you sign off for the day. So really explicitly labeling examples of proactive behaviour, and perhaps over the period of 4 weeks, asking if there's asking them to demonstrate what's 4 weeks. 1 a day, so 20 examples of them being proactive at work, and then you can kind of track them and count them up. And then if they fail the PIP, it's onto a formal written warning, and then you start the whole process again. So you can absolutely manage performance where people aren't taking initiative. I would just want to make sure that taking initiative is actually necessary or is meaningful for their role, to be confident that the steps we were taking as the employer were relevant and were appropriate. Natalie, hi Natalie, thanks for coming along, asks, how much can I tell other employees? Can we let other team members know that we're putting a colleague through a PIP? As the other team members are waiting on action, it looks to them as though we're not taking action seriously and there are no repercussions. That's a great question. So the short answer is no, you cannot tell colleagues of the person going through a PIP that they're being taken through a PIP. That's a breach of their privacy and a breach of your confidentiality obligations as an employer, and they would have grounds to bring a PG against you. So the problem, though, is how do you reassure other members of the team that you are doing something, even though you can't actually tell them what's going on? And this depends a little bit on the vibe of your workplace. So it would be totally fine to, as an example, if you have weekly or fortnightly whips or catch-ups with your team individually, it would be fine for you to say to them, hey, I'm aware that there are some frustrations in the team about workload not being managed equally or not being managed fairly. Because of my confidential obligations as the employer of everyone in the team, I can't tell you what the steps are that we're taking to manage this, but I want to let you know that we are aware of it, we are taking steps to address it. And just like if it was you who I was dealing with something sensitive like underperformance or not showing up, you wouldn't want me telling your colleagues that. So I can't tell you about what we're doing, but I do want to reassure you that we're aware of it and it's been taken care of. So you can say that you're doing something. You can't just name names or make it obvious who you're talking about. So if it's whips, if it's one-on-ones, if you need to kind of quietly pull aside maybe a couple of the like key people in that team to let them know, you can do that. But by no means say that I'm taking Thomas through a PIP because he sucks and he's not delivering what he needs to. That would not be okay. Anonymous asks, last question, and I will let us go because it's 10 past 2. Can subsequent PIPs raise new performance concerns, or do they need to be consistent? They can be for totally different things. So if you have one employee who is on a PIP for poor attendance, and over the course of a month they start showing up on time, they're being there consistently, that's great. They've passed the PIP and that PIP goes to bed. Now, if 2 weeks later there is now an issue about them being rude to customers regularly and kind of slamming the phone down and sighing audibly when a customer asks them for help or whatever the issue is, you can totally start a new PIP for that issue separate to the other one. So PIPs don't have to be PIPs can be for whatever the issue is. You can have multiple issues in the same PIP. If you have someone who's being late and someone who's being rude and someone who's committing a lot of errors, wrap that up into one PIP, right? Like you just have one process for all of the issues, but they don't have to be sequential. They can be for different things. Jumping up and down. Quite a few questions have come through. So thank you all for your engagement. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get to you all. Clearly, I need to be less enthusiastic about inviting questions. But thank you so much for coming along today. We'll wrap it up there. What I will do is I'll take some screenshots of these questions and type out a short answer to them and send that around as a document afterwards. If you have an extra question you would like to ask or something I didn't get to today, please drop me an email, Sylvie, SYLVIE, at myhr.works, and I will come back to you privately, or give us a call on 0800 694 769 if you would like. That was a fabulous session. I feel really energized by your questions and by your engagement, so thank you so much. A recording will be available again with that document with the answers to everyone's questions like I mentioned, but thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at the next one, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your short week. Ka kite. We'll see you next time.